Hello, welcome to the 6th edition of Shrink Wrap. I am so excited today because I have one of my favorite people in the whole world with me, and he's got too many accomplishments for me to list. But I'll just say, first of all, that I met this man, Ken Burtness, as my instructor at Chaminade University in the marriage and family therapy field, the Masters of Science in Counseling Psychology, to be technical. And I liked it so much, I took him for all 4 classes that he was giving. So with no further ado, welcome Ken Burtness.
Thank you.
Shrink Wrap.
Pleasure to be here, Steve.
So, the name of this show is Romance and Marriage? Something
Yeah,
like that.
Jay suggested that. So,
Yeah.
and I said, yeah, that sounds like a good thing. When there are marital problems, romance tends to go out the window, and that's a big, big problem. And one of the things you do in marriage and family counseling is to try to reinstill romance, and that's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, it seems like just staying together for any length of time kind of makes that difficult.
Yeah, it's not only the staying together. I mean, the staying together sort of shifts our ideas, our relationship. And in good relationships, it can enrich it and it can grow. But today's world is very hard on romance. In fact, I call the modern world a romance killer. With all the stresses that people have, especially here in Hawaii. I mean, most people working 2-3 jobs.
Right.
You know, you've got traffic and
Right.
you've got
Insane rent.
insane rent, yeah. And you've just got so many stressors. You've got, you know, and this goes for the whole country, of course, but we're surrounded by incompetence, corruption. You look at the news and it's all negative, you know.
Horrible.
You open the paper up, you watch TV, and we're talking about this disaster and that disaster, and you know, and everybody's in that position of the boss comes to them and say, look, you know, the economy's tough, you know, money is tight. You've got to do more with less.
Right, right.
And if that isn't a stress producer,
Right.
and
Right.
stress is the great romance killer, you know, I mean, it's just, and we just, you know, physically we have less time.
Yeah.
You know, we're spending more time on all these other things, paying bills and taking kids to this thing and doing all that, and we have less and less time for the couple.
Right.
And it's hard to have romance when you have very little time together.
Right.
It's hard to have romance when after a day of being exhausted and stressed upon, you know, from the morning you get up, the moment you get up until later in the day, to somehow at night sort of rekindle this romance. And
Yeah.
it's just very, very hard.
And so, and the problem is that when you first meet somebody, and the chemistry happens, you know, in this mysterious way. You know, it doesn't take more than a few seconds sometime. Although sometimes it could take a long time, but at some point there's a turning point and all these chemicals kick in your brain and you are off to the races.
Yep. And that's the fun part.
That's the fun part. It's intoxicating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, some people say it's almost like getting high.
Yeah.
Right? And when you're with somebody for a number of years, that's unsustainable, right? It just doesn't last, that rush.
Well, you're also getting to know a person in the more intimate ways than you would during a sort of courtship. You
Right.
get into things like, you need to take out the trash, or I'll take out the trash, or leave the toilet seat up, put the toilet seat down,
Right,
you know.
right. Who's going to take them to school? You know,
Yeah,
why,
yeah.
You said you were coming home at 6.
This
and
is a
you're
lot
7.
lot different than courtship.
Yeah, and so, but like, so very often, like, I'll get couples coming to me who there's been an infidelity, and one of the reasons that there's been an infidelity is somebody's new. You just can't get that chemistry with someone you've been married to for 20 years that you get with somebody new. So what do you do about that?
Well, the chemistry changes, but it doesn't mean that the chemistry has to go away. It means that you have to work at the chemistry. You have to give it time. You have to do some special things. You have to, you know, have some pre-things that happen before the romance comes in. You have to set it up. And people people have this fantasy about romance that, and I think we get from Disney movies. They lived happily ever after.
Right.
Well, that doesn't happen in real couples.
Yeah.
Once they get married, then the hard part starts. Then they're
Yeah.
getting adjusted, and who's going to do what, and who's going to give, and who's going to take, and how's this reciprocity going to work? Very, very hard. But you can do it, but it takes work. We think that it should come to us, that
Yeah.
naturally we deserve happiness, which we do, of course.
I don't.
We deserve happiness every place, but it should come to us. We shouldn't have to do any work for it.
Uh-huh.
And it's very typical, like for instance, you go and you work 8 hours, and the job is really tough and it's really stressful, and you come home and you saying, okay, now it's my time. It's
Yeah.
my turn. Somebody make me happy. I've spent 8 hours making other people happy,
Yeah.
doing other people's things, giving to other people. Nobody's giving to me at work.
Yeah.
And so when I get home, somebody should give to me. Well, and in Hawaii, when you've got both the husband and the wife working, and they both come home and they're both tired and they're both stressed, who's going to give to who? It's very hard for us to be loving and caring to other people if we're stressed, and it's hard for us to notice their stress
Right.
because we're just so focused on ourselves.
So what do you do about that?
You have to get a thing where you mutually help each other. And that's the great thing about marital counseling, is that when you have both people in there,
Yeah.
then, well, let's reverse it. If you have one person,
Yeah.
say you've got a husband or a wife come in and they say, my marriage is on the rocks,
Right.
there's no more romance in it, we're having all these fights,
Right.
all these things. And you can work with that one person, but then she or he is going to go home to that toxic environment at home, start dealing with the spouse who has not been in to see you,
Right.
and does not know all these good things that you've been giving their spouse.
Usually she comes in and says, my life is horrible because he's an idiot.
And so you can work with her and you can show her that her life is not horrible. There's wonderful things about her life, but then she goes home and has to deal with the idiot.
Right.
And so, and then she's right back in the box. That's the hard thing about counseling. I mean, we see people 1 hour out of the week,
Right.
and they're in that toxic environment probably around 55 hours. If you take out the number of hours sleeping and the number of hours at work,
Right.
you're left with like approximately 55 hours that you're spending at home,
Yeah.
or probably in the company of your family or your spouse. And so if that relationship is toxic, and all the good work we do for an hour, that's going to be eaten up almost immediately by those 55 hours, and it's going to overwhelm them. But if you got both of them in there,
Uh-huh.
and you've got both people sitting there, and they acknowledge that there is a problem between the two of them, and that it is a joint problem. It's not just her problem.
It's usually
and his
like this.
problem.
There's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Because they don't want to accept accountability for themselves.
Right.
They don't want to say, it's my problem, or I contributed to this problem.
Right.
No matter how little, they want you as a therapist to say, okay, I'll take your side. This guy's the bad person,
Right.
and you're the good person, and that's what they want. And it's very difficult for a therapist to, couples are always sort of vying for your allegiance there,
Right, right.
so that you can
right.
reinforce
No,
their
I'm right,
ability
yeah.
that the other person's the idiot.
Yeah.
And you have to move them away from that so that they say, no, this is a joint problem. We're both accountable, and we both can be part of the solution. We're both part of the problem, but to counteract this, we need to be both part of the solution.
Well, and it also feels like, there's really more, when the couple's in the room, it's not just the couple in the room. It's the couple and the whole family they grew up with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And everybody thinks that, unless it was a really horrible, abusive childhood, and even sometimes if it was, they think that somehow the way they were raised was the right way. And often that's a lot of conflict. A lot of the conflict between the spouses is about the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my kids didn't go to private school. I don't see why they need to go to private school. I went to public school. You telling me that I'm screwed up? That's what it comes down to, right?
Absolutely.
And so you've got the whole families, two families in the room, in their heads, and so how do you deal with that?
Well, that's a problem in when I teach would-be counselors, is they don't see those people in the room. They're sort of invisible to them.
But they're
They don't
hearing
see
them.
the school. They don't see all the peers.
Yeah.
You know, they don't see everything. And what you've got to do as a counselor is you've got to sort of imagine, okay, you've got a spouse here and a spouse there.
Yeah.
You've got to imagine the obstacles that are between them,
Yeah.
that are keeping them from, connecting up,
yeah.
from communicating,
Yeah.
from talking to each other, from working to each other. All the past stuff, all the present stuff, and it's all there. And unless you see that and can work with that, you're not going to get through to these people. It's not a simple thing of where you come in and there's two people there and you talk with the two people and they go home and they're happy and they live happily ever after. That's a psychologist's fantasy. That's not a Disney fantasy. That's a psychologist's fantasy.
Uh-huh. So you're saying that you need to try to bring out that stuff from the past in the session?
If it's impacting the present, yeah. There's so much stuff, you got to choose. We all carry tremendous baggage with us.
Right.
So, and we all have not just one problem, but many problems. So which one do you choose to work with?
Yeah.
Well, I try to focus on the stuff that's real, it's getting them into therapy. And if it's not something that's from the past, that's reverberating in the present, I'm going to probably let that sit until it starts becoming a major stumbling block.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to look at the things that's causing the breakdown, causing them to say to themselves, our marriage is not happy anymore. Our marriage is, where's the romance gone in our marriage?
Right.
These are the things that I'll tackle first and try to tackle as many as I can together because it's all, it's all interwoven there.
So let's say I have a couple and she says in the couples session, one of the reasons that I loved being with him before was because I felt like he brought out the best in me.
And now he's bringing out the worst in her.
And now he's bringing out the worst in her.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you do with that? And it's both ways, of course.
Yeah.
I don't like who I've become now.
Oh, yeah. And that's really, really hard. When you no longer can look at yourself and say, I'm the good person, you know?
Yeah.
And you cannot look in the mirror and say to yourself, okay, so my partner screwed up, but I acted right. I did the right thing. Well, if you look in the mirror and the mirror says back to you, you didn't do the right thing. You could have handled that better. You're not as good a person as you think you are. Whew, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a tough one to deal with, and that's one of the things we have to deal with in marriage and family counseling, is to get them to feel not only better about their spouse, but better about themselves.
Yeah. And then sometimes I also see the kids.
Oh yeah, that's a big thing. The people that I teach over at Chaminade, some of them are going into marriage and family as a specialty. Some of them are going into general mental health, and some of them are going into schools.
Yeah.
As a school counselor. And I say to the people who are specializing in school, I say, look, most of the problems that you're going to see with the kids are going to come back to the home environment, and are probably some major problems with their parents.
Right.
So you better be prepared to deal with the family counseling as well as counseling the kids.
Yeah.
That was driven home to me when I first, you mind if I go back a little history? When I first realized the importance of marriage and counseling was in my first counseling job. And this was when I was working on my master's in California. I was with a federally funded group of counselors. There were 6 of us on a special project to go in and to provide counseling to young adolescents who had been identified by the law enforcement agency, specifically the sheriff and the police, as, quote, juvenile delinquents.
Right.
And this is going back a long time, so probably be using some inappropriate or not politically correct words.
Right.
But so the juvenile delinquents were referred to us for counseling. So one of the first cases I had, this kid was always cutting school. He was always disruptive. He was a nice kid, but he was constantly doing the wrong thing and winding up at the principal's office.
Yeah. Sounds like me.
Well, different from you, probably, it was I'm sitting there working with him, and I notice on his hands there are burns.
Oh.
Some of it's sort of large red spots.
Oh.
And some of it looks like maybe cigarette burns.
Oh.
And so I'm working with a kid, and I find out that his mother tends to get very angry and yell at him and scream at him. And she's occasionally put out her cigarette on his arm. If she's really angry, she takes a She boils a pot of boiling water, and when he's in the bathtub, throws it on him. And so I went to the guy who's running the grant, who was one of the great mentors I've had in my life. His name was Arthur Cohen. He was incredible, and I learned so much from him. And I said to him, I think we need to get the mother in counseling. And we were sort of this small group of counselors, but we were under the umbrella of a mental health consortium. It was run out of a hospital. They had people, who were, in this area, there was about a dozen different arms of people providing psychotherapy.
Yeah.
So he said, yeah. I said, I agree. And so he went and he researched it, and he came back to me the next day and he said, his mother is already getting treatment. He's seeing this psychiatrist in this other wing of the hospital hierarchy, bureaucracy. And he said, so I talked to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said that he had told the mother that she was bottling up her anger too much, and that she needed to express her anger and get it out. This was his instruction to her. So my boss, the head of our counseling thing, told him about what was happening. And the psychiatrist said, well, they said, the kid's your client, and this woman is my client. I have to do what's best for my client.
Oh, God.
And this is 40 years ago, so hopefully things are a lot better. But in some ways, we've still got a long way to go. But that immediately told me, okay.
We got to get everybody together.
We got to get them together.
We need to take a short break right now, and we'll be right back with Ken Burtness and Shrink Wrap. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. And you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Aloha, my name is Reg Baker, and I'm the host of Business in Hawaii with Reg Baker. Business in Hawaii is a program that is positive stories about business in Hawaii. We're tired of hearing the negativity and why it's the wrong place to have a business. We talk about the positive reasons for having a business in Hawaii and how to be successful. We broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Welcome back to part 2 of Shrink Tech. I'm Steve Katz, and I'm here with Ken Burtness, and that was quite a story that you just said, and certainly sounds like a good reason to bring the family together all in one room.
Yeah, and I can give you an example that's much more positive. I mean, that was a tragic one.
Yeah.
But, I'll admit how old I am here, okay? So we'll go back to this first counseling job of mine, which was in 1970 and 1971. I was in California working on my master's degree. And we were working, like I said, in a hospital environment. There was actually a medical facility that we were at, and one of many under this consortium. And this was the year of the Silmar earthquake in Southern California, which was devastating. It was a 7.1, 7.2. And the office building that we were working in was split in two. It was like, you saw this, when I went to work the next day, there was this jagged crack down the center, and it was about a 3 or 4 story building.
Wow.
And so obviously everything was cordoned off and we couldn't work there anymore. So, and we didn't have any other place to go. And everybody was hurting because of the devastation of the earthquake. So we found a house in the neighborhood to rent, and it had like 4 bedrooms. And this turned out to be one of the best things for us, because what we did was we used the bedrooms for counseling rooms. We were able to cook and do stuff in the kitchen, even bring our clients out there and do some cooking therapy, our culinary therapy, I guess. And we had a lot of fun. But one of the things that my mentor, Arthur Cohen, did was he brought family couples together in counseling, not couples, but actually families. So he would we would get the one person who was designated as the quote juvenile delinquent.
Yeah.
And they would bring in their 2 parents.
Yeah.
And we had the living room set up so that we could accommodate usually it was 3, sometimes 4 families. So that was 12 people, and we would have my boss and myself and another therapist, 3 therapists for 12 people. So 4 moms, 4 dads, and 4 kids.
Right.
And we would sit them down, and one, they found it very comfortable because they were not in this sterile medical office type of thing, you know. But in fact, what they were in was a home. And the receptionist that we had would usually bake cookies or something, you know, and have them. And this was at night that we had people come in, so we'd be able to give them cookies. We'd offer them some, you know, a soft drink or some water, like you offered me, which I appreciated. And we just sat down on couches and chairs, you know, and sat around the room. And so they were relaxed. They were, you know, they were not on such foreign turf.
Right, yeah.
But the amazing thing about it, the thing that really turned me on to marriage and family, and the wonderful thing that I saw was that the parents listened to every kid talking except their own.
Right.
And the kid listened to every parent's talking except their own.
Right.
Because the kid and their parents were not talking. And anything that the parents said to the kid threw out.
Right.
And anything that the kid threw out to the parents or said
They
to the
threw
parents, they threw out.
Right.
But to be able to talk to other parents who had
Right.
similar problems and other kids who had similar problems with their parents.
Right. Then they listen.
Yeah, and then you could see the light bulbs going on,
Right.
you know, over their head.
Oh, we do that too.
Yeah, and not only that, but, you know, okay, their answer to this was probably a little better than ours, or maybe it was a little worse.
Right.
And the kids were able to ask the other parents some things,
Yeah.
and the parents were able to ask the other kids some things.
Yeah.
And it was like, you know, communication where there had been no communication, all of a sudden there was communication.
It's amazing. I mean, that's the power of a group. Yeah.
And so that was the positive side of the thing that really turned me on to the power of marriage and family.
Yeah, well, and to me, it's also the power of the group. And I've been trying to assemble a couples group, but it's so hard because people that are already, if they're not already in therapy, they feel like either, hey, it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Or it is kind of shaky and I don't want to mess with it.
Truly.
Or like, it's so terrible, I don't want to air my dirty laundry in front of strangers, which sometimes always includes me, right? The therapist, right? Because this whole stigma about getting help with your brain or with relationships. You know, it's like if somebody has a rash, they'll go to the doctor, but if they're miserable in their marriage, you know, it usually takes about 10 years for them to come in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the positive thing, and here's one of the advantages of being old, you know, like I have, is that it's bad now, but it was far worse 40 years ago. The stigma was, you know, and there was just no way that they were going to consider it. I had a friend of mine come up, and this was just this past month, and said to me, I think I need some marriage and family counseling, I and my wife. And this is a guy and lady who had been married for 42 years, loved each other very, very much.
Yeah.
We're not considering divorce or anything like that. And I said, sure. And I fixed him up with, you know, somebody. And I asked him, I said, you know, I asked him about it, and he said, you know what? I think we just needed a tune-up.
Yeah.
And more people are saying it's okay to go in for a tune-up. And I've always believed in that in cars, and I certainly believe in it in people. If you get a tune-up, you know, at the regular intervals,
Right.
you know, or when things start going a little bad,
Yeah.
you don't avoid the tune-ups and you don't avoid, you know, the minor signs,
Right.
because they're going to get major
Right.
unless you attend to them.
Yeah.
And we've still got a long way to go, but there are more and more people who are starting to look at this and starting to say, yeah, you know, this would help.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging.
Yeah, that is. And I get a lot of people coming in when they're getting near the emptiness stage.
Oh yeah, that's
Because
a hard one.
They've had the kids to blame for 20 years.
Or to preoccupy their time.
Or to preoccupy, right.
Yeah.
It's like they knew they had this mission.
Yeah.
And they could join together, you know, in raising the kids. And it took all their time, like you said. And if things weren't going so well, they could always say, well, who's got time?
Yeah.
Right? But now the last child is about to go off to college, or maybe even a little bit earlier than that. And suddenly they realize they're going to have to talk to this person again, and they don't have a clue what to say anymore.
Yeah.
And all of the stuff that's gotten buried over the years because we don't have the time to deal with it, starts to bubble up, and people start asking themselves, gee, you know, I'm still in my 50s. I could live another 30 years, you know, or more. Do I want to do this?
Knock on wood.
Is this who I want to be with for the rest of my life? You know, hey, I still got options, you know. And then these days, when people can just go online and find their boyfriend from 30 years ago, or you know, on
business.
the phone, and then that becomes a whole thing.
Yeah.
Who you talking to? And sometimes it's, I get a lot of couples like that coming in, and you have to start from the beginning. Like, what attracted you? What did you like about this person when you first met? Really, tell me about your first date. Because by that time, a lot of times they're so angry at each other, they can't. It's hard for them to remember anything good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you can get them doing that, suddenly they're laughing.
Yeah.
And suddenly, like, oh yeah, yeah. Or it's almost a cliche. Oh yeah, I fell in love with him because he was so funny, and now I hate him because he's never serious.
There you go. There you go.
Right? It's usually the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. You have any other tricks that I can use?
There are really no tricks, you know.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of staying with it. You know, if you just use, this is one thing I really try to work with my students on.
Yeah.
They have a certain technique, a certain thing that they do.
Right.
And they throw it out and they do it and they don't get the response that they want.
Yeah.
And I keep saying, you can't just do the technique, you've got to work it. So just throwing out the idea and saying, you know, what was it like, you know, when you were courting, or what was
Right.
it like before you got married?
Yeah.
Like you say, oftentimes they're just too pissed to remember back. It gets in
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
All they can think about is that person across from them is the enemy,
Right.
is the person that they really are angry at.
Right.
And it's hard for them to remember back to that funny guy or that romantic guy or that pleasant guy or that guy who was always a gentleman or, you know, whatever. So you've got to help them do that. You've got to help, you've got to stay with that and take them back to that time. And they're going to be resistant, but you've got to sort of stay with them. And once you get there, and this is really important, you have to have them wallow in it. Because what they've been doing is wallowing in all the negative things that go on between couples. And they've been sitting there and running all these terrible things that hurts that they've gotten over the years, either real or imagined or somewhere in between. And they're just sort of going over and over and over them. Well, you need to not only get them back there, but you need to get them back to that pleasant spot and let them go over and over and over that pleasant stuff.
How wonderful it was.
How wonderful it was.
Yeah.
You've got to get them in that mindset so that they can choose, because they're going to have to be in control of this.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to leave you and they're going to graduate from therapy or
Right.
go home or whatever. They have to be able to say to themselves, okay, I can be in control of these memories. I can be in control of these emotions, and I can choose to be angry,
Yeah.
or I can choose to be happy. I can remember back to the slights, or I can remember back to the wonderful things this person does. And you give them that tool.
That's a hard one for people. I mean, I can hear my clients saying, what do you mean choose to be angry? When he says blah, 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 of course I'm going to get angry. I don't have control over that.
And what you say, of course, is you say, is that helping? Did getting angry help? Well, no. Well, then he in turn got angry at me, more angry. And the angry just sort of builds up. You know, anger breeds anger. Violence breeds violence. You know, and good thoughts breed good thoughts.
Yeah.
If we're looking back in our friendship, and I'm saying, you know, remember 10 years ago when we did this?
Yeah.
You know, and I really felt good about this. And I'm not only back there, but again, you need to think back there. Even if we've had an argument, you're going to start feeling a little bit differently when I'm saying about the good things that we did.
Right, yeah.
Because that's going to help take you back.
Right.
So as this person is bringing up this memory, the other person is sort of dragged along back into that memory. Even if they're angry, it's going to start bringing it down. And,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's work. You know?
It's work, yeah.
It's work. And people think, you know, marriage and family therapy is easy things. It's
With that
exhausting.
thought, we need to take another break now, and we'll be right back with part 3 of Shrink Wrap. Thanks.
Aloha, my name is Justine Espiritu, and I co-host Hawaii Farmers Series with Matthew Johnson of Oahu Fresh. we talk about Hawaii's local farmers and their supporters. In order to have a vibrant and sustainable local food system, farmers are always the foundation, but there's so many other people involved in the community that help support those farmers. So we bring those folks onto our show every Thursday at 4 p.m. We get their backstory, their history, find out a little more about them, and we find out why they love what they do and their perspective and their advice on how we can continue to have a dynamic and vibrant and sustainable local food system. So we broadcast live every Thursday at 4 p.m. and you can also catch us on ThinkTech's YouTube channel as well as Alelo 54. So we hope you tune in and join us. Thank you.
Welcome back. This is Shrink Wrap, Steve Katz with Ken Burtness. And one area that we talked a little bit about when you were talking about your juvenile delinquents experience is the impact of the relationship between the parents on the kids. And I've seen instances where the kid feels like the kid is kind of a scapegoat for stuff going on between the parents. How do you flesh that out?
Not only the scapegoat, I mean, the kids can be used as a weapon against the other parent.
That too.
You know, I mean, this is all happening and it's all interwoven.
Yeah.
And one of the things parents don't realize is what they do, the kids are noticing.
Everything.
You know, and they think, oh, the kid's in the other room, they can't hear this, they got their headsets on, they're watching TV, they're, working on, doing their iPad games or whatever it is that they're doing, and they're not paying any attention to us. Wrong. Wrong.
Yeah.
They're paying attention and they're hearing everything.
Yeah.
And one of the things that parents, especially with younger kids, don't realize is that kids' world is much less complex than ours as far as causal events go. If something bad is happening,
right,
they're not thinking of all the things that are happening at work and there and that, and all the things that are contributing to it. They're thinking, it's my fault.
Right.
So, if I would be a better kid, my parents would get along better.
Yeah.
Because, they're used to, they don't see the parents screw up. But they certainly see their screw-ups because the parents, make a big example of that. So that's.
And I've seen parents actually point the finger and say, hey, it's you that we fight about all the time.
Yeah, or it's you, the only reason we're staying together.
Right, I don't know which is worse. Right.
Terrible things to say to kids. And the kids are internalizing it and they're really feeling bad.
Yeah.
And the parents are either oblivious or they don't care. And so you need to open that up. And you need to say, yeah, you're having an impact. And one of the ways that I do that is have them go back and realize the impact their parents had on them.
Right.
And if you do that, then you bring that forward. I don't sit there and and stay with that, but I bring it forward. I show them the impact that their parents had, and I bring it forward to them, and show it how that similar thing is happening with their situation.
Right.
And you can go further and bring it to when their kids have kids.
Right.
And are we ever going to break the chain here?
Right. It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Are we ever going to? Is our family ever going to be in a family that is not rift with hostility and anger?
Right.
Is our family ever going to be one where people can be relaxed and invite people over and and have that kind of relationship?
Or when people aren't addicted to alcohol or drugs.
Yeah, or drugs. Exactly.
Yeah, and.
So you got to make them aware that the kids are aware.
Yeah.
And that's where having kids in therapy, can help. But that's not an easy thing, and most counselors have a difficult time with that. It's hard enough working with two people as opposed to one.
Yeah.
And not only working with two people, but two people who have history and issues between each other.
Yeah.
And anger.
Yeah.
But when you throw the kids into the mix, it's very, very difficult. But the kids can be a power that's incredible. When I was in substance abuse, working for the Army, we ran in addition to working with legal drugs and illegal drugs, we contracted a tobacco cessation program. And our tobacco cessation program, run by great lady named Tony Barron, and she was just really a master at this. She would, not do it traditionally and sort of, you say you've got to do this for the military or for morality or for the church or whatever, but here's how this can make your life better. And one of the things that she really did was emphasize the kids. And it boiled down to, is this what you want for your kids? And, all the talk about secondhand smoke and how it's affecting them and all that sort of stuff. The people that came to our program had quit before an average of 20 times.
I used to quit every morning.
Yeah, every morning, say, I'm never going to have another cigarette, They couldn't quit for themselves. They couldn't quit for other people. They couldn't quit for their boss.
Right.
But they could quit for their kid.
Yeah.
If they thought that it was harming their kid,
Right.
a lot of people came around and quit, and that's power.
Yeah. Hey, that was my daughter said that's what she wanted for her birthday. Yeah, and it worked.
And that worked.
It worked.
Terrific.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, and also what the weird thing that people do in terms of this stuff that gets transferred down the generations is so often I get a man or a woman who had a parent that would do something like get angry and leave, or get angry and hit, or get angry and drink. And somehow, mysteriously, they go out and find a mate that does that very same thing. Why do people do that? And they claim, I had no idea. And they do it 3 times.
It's what they know, I probably told you this story, but when I first came to Hawaii in the early 70s, I met this wonderful lady. She was just a marvelous lady. I met her on the bus, because it was during the Matson strike and I didn't have a car or anything. We're both taking the bus. And we dated for like 5 years. She was just a wonderful woman.
Yeah.
But one of the things that attracted her to me was that I hardly ever drank alcohol. Alcohol doesn't do good things to my system. It's not a drug of choice, so I very, very rarely drink alcohol. And her father was an alcoholic. So she was bound and determined that she was not only not going to marry an alcoholic, but that she was not even going to date anybody that was into alcohol. And so that was one of her attractions to me. Well, as relationships happen, we sort of went our separate ways after about 5 years, and she moved to a different island and got married to an alcoholic. Became an alcoholic herself.
Wow.
Recovered with the help of AA. Moved to the mainland, divorced her husband. And on the mainland, while she was going to meetings, she met another recovered alcoholic, got married. He relapsed, and she relapsed, which is a typical type of thing.
Right.
He died of alcoholism, and the second time through, she found sobriety in the church. And she just told me the other day had her 34th birthday.
Wow.
After that. But, she was so hell-bent on whether, never, ever to be with a person who had a tendency toward alcoholism. Wound up marrying 2 of them.
Yeah.
And
I think because that's what she knew. That's what was comfortable.
That's what she knew. And of course, there's a genetic component too. There's a whole bunch of things that are working in there. But life just turns out differently. It takes us in different directions than we ever would have imagined.
Yeah.
And sometimes in just the opposite direction that we're aiming for.
Yeah, it's scary. And it's also wonderful.
Yeah.
Who thought I would end up in Hawaii?
Yeah. One of the wonderful happenstances of fate. I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah, and I just keep thinking about the kids, and it's funny. I'm working with a kid now, a teenage boy, and I finally got to meet his mother, and it was incredible. They just kept cutting each other off. They were like 2 peas in a pod.
Or like a husband and wife.
Very much like a husband and wife, right? And it was just like, I was just playing referee. I felt like I should have a timer.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you talk, now you talk. No, not your turn.
Sometimes we have to do that.
Yeah, and you could just see it, and then and that whole thing you pointed out before about how kids won't listen to their parents and parents don't listen to their kids is a hard one without the rest of the group there to get them to do it, because they're responding before the words are out of the other person's mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they could write the dialogue themselves.
Yeah. One, they're used to it, and two, they're hearing the first sentence. And
Yeah.
as soon as they hear the first sentence, they've got their response ready, and it's an angry response.
Right.
So they're going over it in their head while the other
Right.
person is talking, and they're just waiting for that other person to take a breath, and then they're
Right.
Or sometimes they don't wait, and they
Right.
just
Oh, yeah.
interrupt them and just jump
yeah.
in on it.
Yeah, just like couples.
Yeah, just like couples.
Yeah, and it's really hard to cut into that and to just get them to slow down. I mean,
Sometimes it seems artificial when we do that. Like I will give you the pen.
the talking pen.
The talking pen,
Right.
and you've got the pen, and until you give it back to me, I can't talk.
Right.
That seems real artificial to us as therapists. But it really helps because it stops them, and they start hearing the end of what the person's saying, which they haven't heard in a while. They've just heard the beginning of the response. They haven't heard the end. And not only that, but the other person hears their ending part. And that makes them feel good. They're finally getting that going to where they wanted to go, and the other person is still listening.
Right. And
without
sometimes they're
interrupting.
surprised it's not what they think it's going to be.
Exactly. And they start feeling better about themselves. Then they start feeling better about the other person who's not interrupting them all the time.
I mean, sometimes the communication is so bad that there's this other technique, I'm sure you know, where first of all, you encourage each person to keep it, whatever they're going to say, fairly short and simple.
Yeah.
And one aid to doing that is the other person, before they can speak, has to repeat back what they heard.
Right. That's great.
It's torture. It's very artificial, but sometimes I find really necessary, because it takes sometimes 2 or 3 times for so if you say something to me.
Okay, the basketball game was crappy last night.
So what I heard you say, Ken, was that the basketball game was not so great last night.
No, not so great. Yeah, I like that. That's better choice of words.
No, as a therapist, I would say, is that exactly what he said? I would say, no, you didn't get it right, Ken. What I said was, the basketball game last night was crappy. Did you hear me now? And you have to give it back to me again. Right? I mean, I try to keep it as close to verbatim as possible, because the nuances can get you in trouble.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah,
you have to be very careful with those.
And it's a lot of work, and people don't want to do it for very long. But anything that gets them to slow down.
But the key is too, though, that
And to listen.
It's hard work for them to do the repeating, the reflecting back.
Yeah.
But it's very gratifying when the other person reflects their stuff back.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a two-edged thing.
You feel heard.
Yeah.
Literally, this
Right,
person
right.
heard what you said.
So they may find part of it difficult, but they're going to find part of it very rewarding.
Wow. So they asked me to say at the end of the show, how was it for you?
Like I'm the patient here, so I should respond. How was it? Well, it was good for me.
It was good for you.
Yeah.
It was really great for me. And this whole experience, actually doing shrink wrap, I feel like I'm getting further training for free. I get masters of therapy to come on and share what they know, what they do, and help me. And I think the reason they call it a practice is that's what it is. You just keep practicing till you get it right.
Yeah.
And because it's about relationships and people, you never really get it right, because by the time you do, it's changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, somebody told me about, that the story in lovemaking, right? Like, yeah, she tells you over here, but then tomorrow it's not over there.
Yeah. So we did get around to sex eventually.
Yeah, we did. So on that wonderful note of sex, I hope all of our shows can work that in somehow. We're going to wrap up this show. Thank you for joining us. Myself, Steve Katz, and my master, Ken Burtness, for another wonderful segment of Shrink Wrap. Tune in next week at the same time, 3 o'clock, or whenever you're watching this. Thanks again. Bye.